And
When I spoke to Tommy about your dad, because there are very few people around who actually know your dad, but Tommy did. He said he couldn't tell me much. It's hard, but he said the one thing that surprised me, he expected him to be an MP one day.
yeah, yeah. Well, they used to. I mean, I remember that them trying to pressurise him into standing council and all the rest of it. No, like they did me eventually. They wanted me to be an MP.
Yeah, and as far as your dad goes, it wasn't that he just didn't like to do that. He wanted to be a backroom boy.
Yes, he would do everything. He'd work 24 hours a day, but he couldn't speak in public.
Did your mum get involved with the Labour Party?
No, I don't think she approved of him doing anything like that at all, really. She was, she never knew anything about politics. She never crossed her head that there was anything to be done about in politics.
I did speak to your mum about matters political. I was quite surprised that she was on the left of the spectrum. I mean, she was for an old lady. You know, she was quite sort of leftwardly inclined. I wouldn't say sophisticated, but she had good instincts.
Oh yes, yes. I mean, if you were brought up in where she was, you knew about that people were not everybody was equal.
How was she brought up?
Well, there was I don't know how many girls there was, but I think there was 11 girls and a boy brought up in a cottage and had one room downstairs and 2 rooms upstairs. And obviously they weren't all there at the same time, because as soon as they got to be 14, they were put out to service somewhere to work as a slave for somebody else.
Yeah, they became a servant for somebody or other.
Yeah.
Many of them went to London.
Yes, most of them did. Except 1 or 2 of the old ones didn't. I think because one of them got married early, and I think that was the only one who stayed all the time really, was Gertie, who got married and had a family, and but then most of the others, once one went to London, they, as soon as another one was 14, they said, give her a fare and I'll meet her at the other end and find her somewhere.
And how did your parents meet?
I don't know. I think it was something to do with that club again.
I think your mum told me that your dad came round, knocked on the door with a sort of bunch of flowers and asked her out. Where she was working, where she was a servant at the time. I can't exactly remember, but it's a long time ago now.
She was working in Liam Court Road, I think, at the time.
Who was she working for?
I think he was just a businessman. Can't remember their name. But and Aunt Rosa worked there as well. And but they'd had 1 or 2 jobs before that, and the older girls had, watched over them. I know there was some story about some job they had where the older girls, 2 or 3 of the older girls turned up and took them away. But I mean, I wouldn't be told the gory details, but obviously it wasn't a good place for them to be as young kids.
Well, there was a lot of stories about servants, being molested by their employers or seduced by their employers.
Yeah, I guess it was something like that, but they were very quickly whipped out of it by the older girls. And if you'd seen the older girls, you'd know you didn't argue with them.
Yeah. And this club that you went to, there was a lot of alcohol there?
Yes, yeah.
What was your mum's attitude towards alcohol?
A bit disapproving because people got a bit silly with it.
Yeah, but what about Uncle Arthur and you know the falling?
She very much disapproved of Uncle Arthur, yeah.
What about her mother making all the wine?
Well, it seemed to be all right because what she was doing was using up things. And you were only supposed to have one glass, and I was supposed to have half a glass when I was a kid. I'd have some water with it, but my grandmother used to say, I haven't put any water in it.
Yeah. It sounds like your mother was a sort of very early environmentalist.
Yes, I don't know that she thought of it that way. I think it was mainly that she thought it was waste not, want not.
Well, she had this mentality of being dirt poor, because no doubt when she was brought up, her father wasn't earning very much money, and there was a big family, and she was very conscious of means.
If you got one meal a day, you were lucky, I should think.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And this club that they used to like, or your father used to like, what attitude did your mother have about that later on?
Well, she wasn't very happy about it because there wasn't spare money to spend, and once people had had a couple of drinks, they weren't too careful about what they did with their money, and it was a bit sinful, I think.
Yeah, and it was a long way for your parents to go to Loughborough Junction, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes, it was a long ride. Well, you see, we had to go over. I suppose had to is a different word, but yeah, my father wanted to see his father, and I suppose his mother in the early days, and his sisters lived there. But of course, if you wanted to see them, you'd got to pop into the club because that's where they'd be.
Uh-huh. So they used to spend a lot of time in the club.
Mm.
What did your mother think about that?
She thought it was a bit disgraceful.
Yeah, she didn't really approve of that family.
Alcohol, no.
But I mean, she didn't approve of them spending a lot of time in the club.
No, because of the drinking.
Yeah, but they were quite prosperous, weren't they? I mean, your grandfather got on, had a good pension and had a wonderful house, and you know.
Yes, he had a very good job, of course. He was in charge of the print for the what do you call it, stationery office. He was in charge of all the printing, which is a hell of a lot of printing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The stationery office.
But he was a compositor.
Yeah.
But he wasn't just an ordinary. He wasn't a linotype operator, was he? He was
I
on
think
the.
they had linotypes.
Oh, they had linotypes, yeah. Yeah. Linotypes were invented in the 1880s.
Well, that would be about the right time.
Yeah, but your grandfather was working until the 30s, wasn't he?
I expect so. I find it, I don't think he was really. I could always go and see him, and he got so fat he could hardly move. And we used to go and see him in his house eventually. It was, once I was born, the club was ruled out, I think. And he was still president of the union and all that jazz, and you know, the people used to come and see him, even quite important people, I'm told, used to come and see him. But
do you have any idea why he was so fat?
I think it must have been the beer. That would be my guess.
So he used to drink a lot of beer at the club.
Yeah.
And he had this thing about him smoking, and ash would fall down his front.
Yeah, yeah.
What did
Because
he smoke?
it was, you see, his front went out.
No, sorry, we've got to stop this. Just. Right, did your grandfather smoke at all?
Yes, what used to amuse me when I was a youngster was he had a great big belly, and the ash used to fall on it and then he used to slap himself like this, and he used to fly everywhere.
And what sort of things did he smoke?
He smoked cigars.
Now that's quite unusual for a compositor. I mean, I've known a lot of compositors, never known one that smoked cigars.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I suppose they were cheaper then.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I think he must have been pretty damn well paid.
Yeah. Well, he did seem he always seemed to be prosperous. Yeah.
And so why did your mother, disapprove of him?
Because of the drinking and the socialising, and I suppose she thought it was money going to waste. But of course, when my father died, he offered to support us, but she wouldn't have it. And I suppose because she, a word you don't hear now, she didn't want to be beholden to him.
No, she's a very proud lady.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great shame in a way though, because your grandfather would have sent you to a Masonic school.
Yes, he wanted to, or the boat. They had a boat in the Thames, and he was looking at that for me.
And you'd have got a good job, proper career and all that?
Yeah.
And probably never met Mum, and I'd never been born.
Yeah. Well, you'd have been born, but you might have had a different father or a different mother, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah, yeah. Right, hang on. Let me just stop this. We've done that. I'll tell you what.
I was born in South London, in West Norwood.
And who were your parents?
My father was Leonard Brind, Leonard Charles Brind. My mother's maiden name was Hutton, Hilda Hutton.
And what was your dad's job?
He was a civil servant. It sounds strange today, but he worked in the for the post office in the savings department, but it was a civil service job in those days.
So it was like a bank?
Yeah, he was an unestablished civil servant.
Working in a bank?
Yeah.
But your grandfather was also an unestablished civil servant, wasn't he?
Yes, because he worked for he was a printer in charge, whatever, at the stationery office.
And what did your mother do?
She was just a housewife. She was a housewife, cared for the house and me.
And how did your parents meet?
I'm not absolutely certain, but I think they met at a club in Loughborough Junction.
Pretty unlikely your mother going to a club, isn't it?
Well, her and my Aunt Rosa, her sister, her next sister, were a couple of girls in those days. They wore the hobble skirts, and you know, they were the girls of their. You'd making a fuss of everything and having a real lot of fun, I think.
So they were sort of flappers?
Oh yes, that's right. I'm told that their hobble skirts were so tight that the bus conductor used to have to get off the bus and lift them on because they couldn't lift their foot up high enough to get on the platform.
Who told you that?
My mum. Or it might have been Aunt Rosa.
So she was quite proud of it. Was she being hoisted about by bus conductors?
Yeah, they thought that was a bit special. Yeah.
Well, in those days, of course, quite a lot of the bus conductors were women, weren't they? Clippies.
Only during the war.
Oh, so in the 30s, when we're talking about 20s, aren't we talking about? The bus conductors were not women then.
No.
So it was only the First War.
The First and the Second World War, they recruited women because the men had gone off to shoot Germans.
And what did your father do in the war?
He was a sniper, which is a bit strange because he had to always wore glasses, and apparently he had to hold a rifle on the wrong shoulder and all the rest of it, but he was a very good shot.
Why did he have to hold the rifle on the wrong shoulder?
I don't really know, but I've been told he had to. But he got captured, of course.
One would have assumed it was because he was left-handed.
Don't think he was. He was ambidextrous. he could write. He used to play about a lot with. He wrote extremely small print, and he could do it with both hands. And he was a bloody genius at adding up. He could go down a 4-figure column with his pencil and write the answer in the bottom. He was very good.
Well, where did all that ability go? The ambidextrousness and writing very small. Your handwriting is not very good, is it?
No, and I can't spell.
Well, you don't have to be able to spell to be a mathematician, do you?
No, well, I suppose I'm not too bad at that. But my father was. I obviously didn't inherit his brains.
I don't know. Your mum wasn't too stupid, was she really?
No, she wasn't stupid. She was just uneducated. I mean, she'd been to a village school until, well, 14, I think, but I'm not sure. And then, of course, straight out to work, boarded in a farmhouse somewhere way out from anywhere, and doing the housework for an old couple.
Well, it wasn't long before she went to London, though, was it?
Yeah, her older sisters. There were some. I don't know what happened, but something was wrong, and a couple of her older sisters went and collected her, and took her up to London and found her a job up there.
And what you were talking about your father's war and him being a sniper. What happened to your father in the war?
Well, the war was fought in Flanders over the fields, and the snipers used to be in sort of shell holes in front of the line. They're shooting anyone they saw, and of course the problem was the line retreated, and they didn't tell him, so he suddenly found himself behind German lines.
And what happened then?
He got captured by the Germans and put in a prisoner of war camp.
That was very kind of you, kind of them. I would have thought if they'd come across a sniper, they'd have shot him.
Well, I don't know. I suppose the problem is, you see, if they did and it got out, we would have shot theirs as well.
Yeah. So it was a sort of gentleman's agreement that they took prisoners.
Yeah.
But
They did. But they were in awful trouble. They didn't have any food, and he didn't get fed very much. When he was released from the prison camp, they wouldn't bring the prisoners home because they looked in such a poor state. They took them on a trip round up to Norway and back to feed them up before they release them to the public.
Right. And how long was he in? He was in a German prisoner of war camp.
I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I think.
Well, I don't think he was captured until 1917 then.
I don't know. He was very young when he joined the army, put his age up, I think. And of course, when he came out of the army, he went straight back to the post office. But I really don't know.
He didn't really leave the post office though, did he? Because he joined the post office rifles.
Yeah.
And what they were territorial regiments, so he was actually training with the post office rifles while he was still working.
I should think so, yeah.
So I mean, he wasn't in right at the beginning because he was still being trained up, I think, by the
probably, yes. It's hard to tell. I mean, couldn't have been very old, could he?
I think I can't remember offhand, but I think he was born in 1895-ish. So 1914, he'd have been about 19.
19, yeah, oh well. Plenty old enough. There was a lot younger than that going.
Well, I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that the average combatant was 17 years old in the First World War.
Yeah, and in the second.
Well, that's the usual way these things go.
17 and a half in the second.
Yeah. So he'd have been, you know, by the standards of the time,
Yeah.
not particularly young.
No.
And did he ever tell you anything about the German prisoner of war camp?
No, he never talked about it at all. But I was very young when he died.
Did your father smoke?
Yes, rolled his own.
Did you notice anything about his hands?
Yellow, stained from the tobacco.
And why was that?
I think it was a strange tobacco they had in those days. Of course, they had no filter tips, you see. So you rolled them up and put them in your mouth, and when you took it out, the end was soggy.
And did he manage to smoke while he was in a prisoner of war camp?
I shouldn't have thought so. They weren't. The Germans were very, very stretched for everything. They didn't have any food. So I doubt if they had tobacco.
Well, they got Red Cross parcels, didn't they?
I suppose, I don't know.
I mean, the Red Cross was certainly active in the First War.
Yeah. No, I assume they did, but I don't know.
And when he came out of the war, he went back to the post office, did he?
Yes.
What was his job in the post office?
Just bookkeeping.
And when you were young, do you remember him sort of going to work? Did he go to work on a Saturday morning, for example?
No, he only worked 5 days a week. And he went on I'm not sure whether it was the bus or the tram, but one or the other, up to London.
So where were you living then?
We were living in West Norwood.
And what was that, Knowles Road?
He died when we lived in Knowles Road, but before that we lived in Lansdowne Hill. And when I was born, we lived in Gypsy Road, I think it was.
Were you born in a hospital?
A nursing home.
Which nursing home were you born in?
It was on Knights Hill. I don't know what it was called, and it's gone now, I think.
Why were you born in a nursing home?
I don't know. I assume because they were slightly better off than most people, because he had a decent job, and that seemed a good thing to do.
Yeah. And did your mum have any connection with the nursing home?
No, my mother, I don't think ever had any connection at all, anything like that. She was just a servant until they were married.
And how come you were an only son?
I don't know. I think perhaps she wasn't very prolific.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, your dad wasn't very well, was he? I mean, he'd suffered terribly in the First War.
Yes, well, as a result of starvation, and he got ended with a peritonitis, but before that it was, kidney trouble and that kind of thing.
But peritonitis wasn't to do with being unwell in the First World War, because people can have peritonitis. Simon had peritonitis when he was young.
Yeah, but they said he was in poor health because of the prisoner of war thing, so he got these things.
Sorry, could we wait? Right. So what were we talking about? Sorry.
We were talking about my father after the war.
Your father after the war, yeah, he got peritonitis.
Yeah, well, appendicitis, which became peritonitis.
Which was quite common in those days.
Well, they weren't very. They don't. The first appendicitis operation had been done not long before on the king. It was quite a new thing to operate on.
Yeah, but you talk about Edward the Seventh, aren't you? Or Edward the Seventh in like before the First World War.
Was it? Or I thought it
Yeah.
was George V.
No, I think it was Edward the Seventh. I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah.
Well, it was a fairly, not a commonplace thing to do. And I think what happened was they got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, it was a difficult thing in those days.
Yes.
What's that noise?
The dog's barking.
Which dog is that?
William, no, there's William.
Sasha?
Sasha.
Yeah. Right. So, what happened to your father?
Well, he went into hospital with appendicitis. It turned into peritonitis, and he died.
But wasn't it at a particular time when it happened?
No.
Wasn't he campaigning in an election?
Oh yeah, well, he was the secretary of the local Labour Party, so I think there was an election on at the time, and he was working quite hard, doing all of the work that secretaries do.
And he was secretary agent, wasn't he?
I don't know. Yes, probably was. Yeah. Because he believed very strongly in the Labour Party, but he didn't feel able to stand up and make speeches, and that's what he wished on me, so I was able to.